West Virginia, spring of 1942. A mountain rises out of the morning fog like something that has been waiting. At the foot of that mountain, a coal town with the lettering faded off its storefronts, a water tower with a dent in the side, a diner where men in dusty hats turn their heads as a bus pulls in. Out steps a girl, barefoot, shoes in one hand, 18 years old, a cloth bag at her side. Behind her, 8 years of being nobody's daughter. Ahead, 12 miles of dirt road, climbing into rhododendron, so thick it eats the sky. And further up, where the road stops being a road, a wall of green hides. Something the world has been told is worthless. It is not worthless. A dark green truck idles at the bottom of the path. A gold ring catches the afternoon light. The driver does not get out. Not yet. The day Magnolia Whitfield turned 18, the state of West Virginia gave her 3 things: a brown envelope, a cloth bag with 2 cotton dresses, and a pair of shoes that did not fit. That was the whole inheritance. That was what 8 years of being a ward of the diocese had bought her. 8 years of being nobody's daughter. 2 minutes in a wooden chair across a polished desk while Sister Vesta read from a piece of paper without once looking up. Because Sister Vesta did not look up at girls. Because Sister Vesta had been keeping a ledger in her head for 40 years. A ledger of which girls were soft and which girls were useful. Soft girls got the laundry. Useful girls got out. Maisie had been working very hard at being useful. She stood in the office at 7:15 in the morning with her hands folded in front of her and her chin level. The office smelled like beeswax and old paper and the kind of cold authority that had been steeping in those walls for 40 years. There has been correspondence, Sister Vesta said. Maisie waited. From a lawyer in Boone County. Still nothing on her face. Nothing. It seems your maternal grandmother, a woman named Verena Whitfield, whom you have never met, has died. The clock on the wall ticked twice. Maisie counted it. She always counted things when she could not feel her hands. 3 months ago. 3 months. The word sat in the room. And she has left you her estate. The word landed like a feather on a stone floor. Estate. Maisie did not move. She did not breathe. She had spent 8 years in this building, learning to look at adults the way you look at a window. Through, past, never at. Sister Vesta tipped her chin down. The corners of her mouth did something that was not quite a smile. 14 acres of steep wooded hillside, she read. A dwelling in disrepair, and a limestone cave formation of no commercial value, currently inaccessible due to overgrowth. She paused. She made sure the pause hung in the air. Congratulations, Miss Whitfield. Maisie said nothing, because if she said anything, she might say everything, and girls who said everything in front of Sister Vesta did not eat supper, so she nodded. She took the envelope. She walked out. And the worst part, the part she would carry with her for the rest of her life, happened at noon, because Sister Vesta read the letter aloud in the dining hall, in front of every girl and every nun in the building. Maisie was sitting on the 3rd bench from the back, bowl of gray potatoes, spoon halfway to her mouth. When Sister Vesta tapped her water glass with a butter knife and stood up at the head table. "Girls," she said, "we have news." The room went still. "Our Magnolia Whitfield has come into a great fortune today." A few girls turned their heads. Maisie's spoon hit the bowl. Sister Vesta read it. The whole letter. The 14 acres, the dwelling in disrepair, the limestone cave of no commercial value, and when she got to the word overgrown, she paused, for effect. Then someone laughed. Then someone else laughed. Then it was the whole room laughing. 40 girls, 8 nuns, the laundress, the handyman who had been carrying in a sack of flour and stopped to listen, all of them, laughing. A cave, an overgrown cave. That was what Magnolia Whitfield had been left. Maisie sat very still and looked at her potatoes, because if she looked up, she would see Sister Vesta's face, and she would see what Sister Vesta actually thought of her, which was nothing, which was less than nothing, which was a thing the diocese had been carrying around for 8 years and had finally found a reason to set down. She did not finish her potatoes. She did not eat supper either. She left at 5 the next morning, because Sister Vesta had told her the bus came at 6, because she had $13 folded into the envelope, because the lawyer in Boone County, a Mr. Orrin Pruitt, would be expecting her at the Whitesville Depot Thursday afternoon, and because Magnolia Whitfield had spent 8 years in that orphanage learning 2 things and 2 things only: how to disappear and how to walk. There was one person at the gate, Sister Marguerite, the novice from Pittsburgh, the youngest nun in the building, the only one in 8 years who had ever brought Maisie a second piece of bread without being asked. She did not say much. She just pressed a small red apple into Maisie's coat pocket and held her shoulders for 1 second. Then she stepped back. Maisie walked out the front gate with her cloth bag in one hand and her shoes in the other, because the shoes still did not fit, and because the gravel was cold, and the world outside the gate was colder still, and she figured she might as well start the way she meant to continue, barefoot and alone. The bus took 6 hours. It rattled through hill country she had never seen, past coal tipples and church steeples and barns leaning sideways into the wind, past creeks that ran black with calm, past little towns where men in dusty hats stood outside the post office and stared at the bus like it was bringing news of the war. It wasn't. It was bringing Magnolia Whitfield. She sat by the window with her cloth bag in her lap and her envelope tucked inside her coat, and she did not sleep, and she did not eat the apple Sister Marguerite had slipped into her pocket at the gate, because that apple was the only proof that one person in that building had cared, and Maisie wanted to save it for when. Whitesville came into view at 3:12 in the afternoon. It looked tired. It looked the way a town looks when its best years have walked away and not come back. Coal town, gray brick storefronts, the lettering faded into ghosts of their own names, a water tower with a dent in the side, a church, a diner, a general store with a Coca-Cola sign hanging crooked. The bus stopped. The driver said, "Whitesville, anyone getting off?" Maisie stood up. Her shoes still did not fit. She walked to the front. She stepped down, and there was a man, tall, well past 70, tobacco-stained fingers, a wool overcoat that looked like it had survived 2 winters and was negotiating with a third. He was holding a folded paper, and when he saw her barefoot girl with a cloth bag, he tilted his head. "You Magnolia Whitfield?" "Yes, sir." "Orrin Pruitt." He did not offer to shake her hand. He just nodded toward a truck parked across the street. "Got about 12 miles up that mountain. You hungry?" Maisie shook her head. She was hungry. She had been hungry since the dining hall yesterday, but she was not going to say so, because saying so would make her a girl who needed things, and she had spent 8 years being a girl who did not need things, and she was not about to undo that on the first day of being free. Orrin Pruitt looked at her bare feet. He looked at the shoes in her hand. He did not say anything about either. He just walked across the street and opened the truck door. The truck smelled like dog and kerosene, and something else underneath, something old and warm and slightly sweet, like apples turning in a barrel. Maisie climbed in. They drove for 3 miles. Orrin Pruitt said nothing. The mountain road wound up into rhododendron, so dense it made a tunnel. The sky disappeared, then came back, then disappeared again. Then he cleared his throat. Your grandmother. Maisie looked at him. She was a particular woman. Maisie waited. That's the Appalachian way, he said, of saying somebody was strange. She almost smiled. She didn't, but she almost did. Lived up that hollow alone for 30-some years, Pruitt went on. Came to town maybe twice a year. Folks left her alone. She returned the favor. Did anyone know her? He shrugged. Knew of her. She grew things. Had a garden people talked about, though most never saw it. After the cave got overgrown, she stopped letting anyone near the property. Why? He shrugged again. The same shrug, like the question itself had no shape worth holding. Like I said, particular woman. He drove another mile. Then he added, she walked into my office in 1911, about a year after she arrived in this county, paid me $20 to draw up the deed on the land, which was a lot of money in that year. He paused. Then she came back 22 years later and had me do something else, something I am going to tell you about tomorrow. He paused again. Either way, she wrote me a letter every January for 30 years. Same letter, same envelope, same handwriting, same instructions. If she died, find you, wherever you were, and give you the key. Maisie turned and looked at him. What did she have you do in 1933? He glanced at her. That Miss Whitfield is the question for tomorrow. The truck stopped at the end of a path that was more suggestion than road. 2 ruts in the mud, disappearing into a wall of green. Orrin Pruitt reached into his coat and handed her a brass key, a folded $5 bill, and a handshake that felt like an apology. Cabin's about a 1/4 mile up, caves behind it somewhere in the hill. I've never been inside, don't know anyone who has, not in years. Maisie put the key in her pocket. Mr. Pruitt? Yes. You said tomorrow. He looked at her. I'll come by in the morning with a basket of things my wife thought you might want. He paused. Then he said, eat the apple magnolia. And he drove away. She stood at the foot of the path for a long time. The mountain rose up in front of her like a wave that had been frozen mid-crash. Green, thick, alive in a way the orphanage had never been alive. The air smelled like wet leaves and old wood, and something colder underneath, something mineral, something cave. She put on her shoes. She walked. The cabin appeared through the trees at the top of a small rise. It was small. 1 room, stone fireplace at the gable end, a roof that needed patching but had not given up, a door with a brass plate set into the wood, and a keyhole the exact shape of the key in her pocket. Maisie put the key in. It turned with a small, clean click. She pushed the door open, and she stopped, because the cabin was full, not full of furniture. There was furniture, a bed, a table, a wood stove, a rocking chair, but the rest was something else. Every windowsill held a row of glass jars, hundreds of jars, each one labeled, each one filled with something dried, roots, leaves, petals, seeds. The labels were in 2 languages, English, and something Maisie could not read, letters she did not recognize, curling and angular, like a forest written down. The walls were covered in books, not Bibles, not novels, botany, soil chemistry, something called mycology, something called permaculture, a word she had never seen in her life, And yet there it was 3 times on 3 different spines, and pinned everywhere diagrams, cross-sections of root systems, sketches of fungal networks, maps of the hillside with careful notations about sun and shade and water flow. The whole room was a library and a laboratory and a kitchen and a chapel all at once. Maisie set her bag down. She walked to the table, and on the table was a journal, open, mid-sentence. She bent over it. The handwriting was old, trembling but precise, like someone whose hand had been steady for 60 years and had just started to forget how. The page was dated December the 14th. The last entry was 3 lines long. The first 2 were about the weather and the kindling. The third stopped mid-word. It said, "When you come, my magnolia, remember that I have loved you since the day." That was it. The pen had been set down. The ink had a small smear at the end, like the writer had paused, reached for a thought, and not made it back to the page. Maisie sat down at the table, slowly. She pressed her palms flat against the wood, and she breathed. Because a woman she had never met, a woman whose name had never been spoken in the orphanage, a woman whose existence she had not known about until yesterday afternoon at noon in front of 40 girls and 8 nuns and the laughing handyman. That woman had been writing her a letter when she died. Maisie sat at that table for a long time. The shadows moved across the floor. The wood stove was cold. Somewhere in the hill behind the cabin, a stream was running, and she could hear it through the open door, like a low, constant breath. She did not finish reading the journal. She did not eat the apple. She just sat, and after a while, she put her head down on her arms, and she slept. It took her 3 days to find the entrance. She did not even mean to start looking. She woke up that first morning curled at the table, neck stiff, sun on her face. She drank water from the rain barrel. She ate the apple finally slowly, in tiny bites, because she had a feeling that if she ate it fast, she would cry, and she still was not ready to cry. Then she walked outside and looked at the hill, and the hill looked back. 200 feet of near vertical stone face, limestone underneath. She could see flashes of it, pale and ancient, like the bones of something asleep, but over the bones kudzu, sheets of kudzu, ropey curtains of it dropping from the ridge to the floor, wild grape weaving through, honeysuckle filling the gaps, Virginia creeper climbing the rock in fine red threads, a wall of green. It was beautiful. It was also obstinate. 30 years of obstinate. She found the sickle in the tool shed behind the cabin, rusty, the handle worn to the shape of someone else's grip. She wrapped her fingers around the worn places. Her hand and Verena's hand met at the wood across the years. Hello, she thought. Then she started cutting. Day 1, she made it about 6 feet into the green. Day 2, her arms would not lift. Day 3, she dragged herself out anyway and cut for 10 hours. Her hands bled. The blood mixed with the green sap and made a kind of dark resin that crusted across her palms and would not wash off in the rain barrel. She kept going because she could not turn around. Because if she turned around, there was a cold room and a cold stove and the brown envelope on the table. And 400 miles between her and the gate. She had walked out of Barefoot, and nothing on the other side of the gate that wanted her back. So she cut. On the afternoon of the 4th day, she felt it. Cold air, not wind, something deeper, air that came from inside the earth, cool, damp, constant. It touched her cheek where the kudzu had just given way, and she froze with the sickle still raised, because for one long second she thought she had imagined it. Then it touched her again. She cut faster. She cut until the light started to go, and her arms shook, and her shoulders had no give left in them. She cut until the wall of green began to shift, until vines that had hung together for decades came apart in slabs, until she could see a darkness behind the green that was not the darkness of more green. It was the darkness of nothing, the darkness of a hollow. She stepped back. She breathed. The afternoon light came slanting through the canopy at an angle the way light does in late March in the West Virginia mountains, gold and tired and honest, and it landed on the limestone face, and it lit up something she had not been able to see before. Letters, carved letters, above the entrance. She put down the sickle. She walked closer. The letters had been chiseled deep, then half-eaten by 30 years of moss and root, but they were there, plain as a signature, plain as a name on a page in a courthouse ledger. V. Whitfield, 1913. Maisie stood there in the slanting light with her bleeding hands at her sides and her breath making small clouds in the cool air at the cave mouth. 29 years ago. Her grandmother had marked this cave 29 years ago, 11 years before Maisie was even born. Then she had let the forest grow over it. She had let the vines grow over it. On purpose, she had locked it with leaves and waited for someone, for her. Maisie pressed her hand flat against the stone right under the V. The limestone was cold, smooth where the chisel had worked it, rough everywhere else. She did not cry. She didn't. But her throat closed up so tight she could not have spoken her own name. She slept that night in the cabin with the door open. She woke before dawn. She lit the kerosene lantern. She put on her grandmother's wool coat, which she had found hanging on a peg by the door, and which fit her almost exactly. She picked up the lantern. She walked out into the dark, and she stepped inside. The first chamber was unremarkable, a natural limestone passage, maybe 8 feet wide, just tall enough to stand in, running about 30 feet into the hillside, the walls damp, the floor smooth from centuries of water flow. Her footsteps echoed. The air was steady, maybe 55 degrees, cool, even, the kind of temperature that does not change with the seasons, because caves do not know about seasons. Caves only know about themselves. The lantern threw her shadow against the limestone in long, slow shapes. She walked. Water dripped somewhere ahead. The passage curved, and then the passage opened, and Magnolia Whitfield stopped breathing, because the chamber on the other side was enormous, 80 feet long, 40 feet wide, with a ceiling that arched up into a shadow the lantern could not reach, a cathedral carved by water over 1,000,000 years, hidden in a mountain. That was not what stopped her breath. What stopped her breath was the light, because the chamber was glowing, not the lantern, the chamber itself, the walls, the shelves, the ceiling, a soft blue-green light, like a sky after a storm, like the inside of a moonstone, coming from everywhere at once. Maisie lifted the lantern higher, and she saw mushrooms, thousands of them, no more than thousands. They covered every surface. They grew from logs, oak, and poplar cut to uniform lengths and stacked in careful configurations along the chamber floor, row upon row, tilted, crossed, arranged like a quiet city. They grew from shelves carved into the limestone walls, each shelf packed with a dark, rich substrate. Maisie could smell from the doorway, forest floor, wet bark, the deep green-brown of something alive and breathing. They grew from bags suspended from wooden frames bolted into the ceiling, cascading downward in pale, luminous clusters, and some of them glowed. Not all, but enough. Enough to light the chamber, enough to make the air itself look soft, like a cathedral lit by candles that did not need to be lit, because the candles were alive, and the candles were everywhere. Maisie took one step, then another. Her lantern shook in her hand. She walked deeper. The further she went, the more she saw. The chamber was not one chamber. It was many. There was an alcove off to the left, and she walked toward it, and the alcove opened into another room, smaller, warmer, steam rising from a pool of water carved into the stone floor, a hot spring, a natural hot spring, with clay pots arranged around its edges and copper pipes running along the wall pipes her grandmother had hand-bent, carrying the warm water out to the substrate beds in the next chamber. Heat. Verena had built heat into the mountain. Maisie walked back. She turned right. Another opening, another chamber. This one she could not at first understand, because this one had trees, underground trees, a small orchard of dwarf fruit trees, apple and pear, and something with peach-colored buds, just beginning to swell, growing in raised beds of soil, under the blue-green light of the glowing mushrooms on the ceiling above them, grafted, each trunk carrying 3 or 4 different grafts. Cultivars she would later learn had names like Hugh's Crab and Aunt Rachel and Magnum Bonum, but she did not know those names yet. She just stood in an underground orchard, lit by living light, smelling of applewood and damp earth and the faint warm copper of the spring water running through the wall. And, she thought, this is not a cave, this is a kingdom. She walked back to the main chamber. She walked the rows. She touched the logs. She touched the substrate. She held her hand to the air and felt the slight current that moved through the chamber. Natural ventilation. Verena had carved drafts into the mountain, channels in the limestone that pulled fresh air in from one side and pushed stale air out the other. Engineering, prayer, both. Maisie sank down onto the cold stone floor. She sat there, among the mushrooms, and she laughed. She laughed until she could not breathe. Then she cried. She cried until her chest hurt. Then she laughed again, because 18 years she had been told she was no one, daughter of nobody, state's problem, cave inheritance, overgrown nothing, and the woman who had loved her since before she was born had built her a kingdom. She got up after a while. She walked back to the cabin in the dark, through the first chamber, past a carved name above the door, down the slope. She did not sleep. She could not sleep. She lit every lamp in the cabin. She made a fire in the wood stove. She put water on to boil, and she started looking, because if there was a kingdom in the mountain, there had to be more. There had to be more. She looked through the books. She looked through the diagrams. She looked at the maps of the hillside pinned to the wall, and she saw the notations now that she had been inside. South vent, heat pipe 3, substrate bed 7. Her grandmother had not been a hermit growing a garden. Her grandmother had been an engineer, a scientist, a keeper of something Maisie did not yet have a word for. She kept looking. She pulled open drawers. She opened the cupboard. She lifted the mattress on the bed, and underneath there was nothing. She knelt down at the trunk under the window, the one she had not opened yet, the one with the brass clasp and the leather strap. She unbuckled it. She lifted the lid. Inside folded wool, linen, a pair of moccasins worn smooth at the heel, and under that a tin box, old, painted blue once, the paint mostly gone, the lid sealed with wax that had cracked but not broken. Maisie lifted it out. She set it on the table. She used the bread knife to lift the wax, and she opened it. Letters. She knew it was 47 because she counted them twice, 3 times, because her hands were shaking and she did not trust her counting the first time or the second. 47 envelopes tied with twine, each one addressed in the same careful, trembling handwriting. To Miss Magnolia Whitfield, care of the Sisters of Mercy, Home for Girls, Charleston, West Virginia. The first envelope was dated November of 1934, 3 months after Maisie's mother had died, 3 months after the state had sent Maisie to Sisters of Mercy. She opened it with the same bread knife. The paper inside was thin, brittle at the folds, but the ink was still dark. My dearest Magnolia, you do not know me. I am your grandmother. My name is Verena. I am your mother's mother. I am writing this letter on the porch of a small cabin in Kenny's Creek Hollow, which is in Boone County, which is about 120 miles from where you are now. I am writing it on a Tuesday in November of 1934. The leaves are off the trees. The sky is the color of cold milk. I am sorry that I did not come for you when your mother died. I tried. I want you to know I tried. I rode the bus to Charleston 3 weeks ago. I went to the office. I asked them to release you to me. I had the papers Mr. Pruitt drew up. I had my hand on the desk. I had your mother's photograph in my pocket. They said no. They said I was too old. They said I lived too far from town. They said the diocese had already taken custody, and the diocese did not return children to family they had not yet placed. I do not know why they said any of this to me. I am 62 years old. I am not too old. I am stronger than most women half my age. I walk 5 miles before breakfast. I split my own wood. I grow my own food. I think they did not like that I am part Cherokee. I am writing to tell you that I am here, that I am yours, that this house and this hill and the cave behind it are all for you. Whatever they tell you about who you are, you should know that you come from a line of women who knew the names of every plant on this mountain in 2 languages. I will write to you every season. I will send these letters to the Sisters of Mercy. I do not know if they will give them to you. I hope they will. Until I see you, my dearest Magnolia, please remember that you are loved. Your grandmother, Verena. Maisie folded the letter. She set it down. Her hands were not shaking anymore. Something in her chest had gone very still, very quiet, the way a room goes quiet just before a clock strikes. She opened the second letter, then the third, then the fourth. She read all of them. It took her until just before dawn. 47 letters, 8 years. Verena had written every season, spring, summer, fall, winter. She had written about the cabin, about the garden, about the cave and the mushrooms and the books she was reading and the snowstorm in January of 1938 that had pinned her inside for 9 days. She had written about a Cherokee woman from the Qualla boundary who had come to visit and stayed for the summer. She had written about an injured fox she had nursed back to health and named Pumpkin. In every letter, every single one, she had said the same 3 things at the end. I am here. You are loved. When you come, Sister Vesta had never given Maisie a single one, not one. For 8 years, a woman in a cabin on a mountain had been writing to a girl in an orphanage in Charleston, and the woman in the wimple sitting behind the desk in the office had taken every letter and done something with it. That was not delivery. The sun came up. Maisie was still sitting at the table. The letters were spread out around her in a kind of careful circle, like petals, like a flower with 47 petals that had bloomed in the dark while no one was watching. She did not cry. because she had used up her crying in the cave. She picked up the unfinished journal entry, the one that said, "When you come, my magnolia, remember that I have loved you since the day," and she slid it into the center of the circle so that the sentence Verena had not finished was surrounded by every sentence she had, and the unfinished one became a small bright window at the heart of the bloom. Maisie sat there, and she said out loud, to no one, to the cabin, to the mountain, to the woman she had never met, "I came." Then she put her head down on her arms, and she finally cried. She cried the way an 18-year-old girl cries when she has just learned at 5 in the morning on a Tuesday in late March in 1942 in a cabin on a hillside in West Virginia that she has been loved her entire life by a woman she will never get to meet, and that the people who told her otherwise were lying, and that the lie was so big it had eaten 8 years of her life. She cried for the apple sister Marguerite had pressed into her pocket, the only kindness in 8 years, and she cried for the 47 kindnesses she had never been allowed to know about. She cried until the sun came in through the open door, until the rain barrel outside started to ping with the small tapping of a spring rain, until the wood stove burned down to coals, and when she was done she stood up. She washed her face in the rainwater. She put on her grandmother's coat. She looked at the table, at the circle of letters, at the unfinished sentence at the center, and she said one more thing, out loud, to the cabin, "All right," because Orrin Pruitt was coming up the path with his basket and his tomorrow and the something he had told her he was going to tell her today, and because Magnolia Whitfield, who had walked out of a gate barefoot 4 days ago with $13 in a cloth bag, was not the same girl anymore. She was a girl with a kingdom in a mountain and 47 letters in a tin box, and a name in her grandmother's handwriting that had been waiting 8 years to be spoken. She was a girl who had been loved. And outside the rain came harder, and the green on the hill leaned into the wind, and somewhere deeper in the dark of the cave behind the cabin, the glowing mushrooms breathed their quiet blue light, and the heat pipes ticked, and the underground orchard turned its small leaves toward a light that did not come from the sun, and Maisie Whitfield put her hand on the brass key in her pocket, and she walked to the door, and she opened it. Orrin Pruitt came up the path the next morning at 10 o'clock sharp. He came in his truck. He brought a basket. His wife had packed it. There was a loaf of bread, a jar of apple butter, a wedge of cheese wrapped in wax paper, a wool blanket she did not need anymore, a pair of work gloves, and a pencil, a new yellow pencil with a clean eraser. Maisie stood on the porch in her grandmother's coat with her hands in her pockets and watched him climb. He stopped at the bottom step. He looked at her. He looked at the way her face had set since yesterday. He said, "You found the cave." "Yes, sir." "You went inside." "Yes." He nodded. He set the basket down on the step. He took off his hat. He held it in both hands. "There's a thing your grandmother had me do in 1933. I remember. I am not going to tell you about it today." Maisie waited. "I am going to tell you about it when somebody comes for it." She frowned. "For what?" "For what's inside that cave magnolia." The morning birds did a small song in the rhododendron behind the cabin. Pruitt put his hat back on. "Somebody is going to come." "How do you know?" "Because she told me they would, and because she was right about everything else she ever told me." He looked at her. "When they come, and they will come, you find me. You do not sign anything. You do not say much. You wait. You come to my office. We will speak then." "Mr. Pruitt?" "Yes." "Who is they?" He looked down at the basket. He looked back up. That, Miss Whitfield, is something your grandmother knew, and I do not. He touched the brim of his hat. He walked back to his truck. He drove away, and Maisie stood on the porch with the basket of bread and apple butter and the new yellow pencil, and she thought, somebody is going to come. She thought it twice. Somebody is going to come. Then she went inside. She lit the stove. She cut a slice of bread. She put apple butter on it. She ate, because if somebody was going to come, she was going to need her strength. She tried to sell mushrooms in Whitesville on a Saturday in late April. She walked down the mountain with 2 baskets on a yoke across her shoulders. The yoke was old, the straps cut into her collarbones, but the baskets were full. Pearl oyster on one side, shiitake on the other. Heavy, fresh, beautiful in a way she did not have words for yet. She had been picking them since dawn. She had washed her hair in the rain barrel. She had put on her grandmother's wool coat. She thought she might come home with $5. She thought she might come home with 3. She came home with nothing. The first woman she stopped on the street looked at the mushrooms and stepped back, like Maisie had offered her a basket of snakes. What are those? They're oyster mushrooms, ma'am. They're very good. You can fry them or put them in soup. They don't look right. They're meant to look like that. The woman walked away. It went like that all afternoon. Some people just shook their heads. Some made faces. Some asked her where she was from in a way that meant they had already decided they did not want the answer. A man named Floyd Briscoe came out of the feed store and stood with his arms folded and watched her for 10 minutes. Then he walked over. He was big, fed, the kind of man who liked an audience and made sure he always had one. That you, the Whitfield girl. Yes, sir. From up Kenny's Creek. Yes, sir. He looked into the basket. He spat on the sidewalk. Those are cave mushrooms. Yes, sir. You ought to be ashamed of yourself. Maisie blinked. Sir, trying to sell cave mushrooms to honest people, those things are probably poison. Your grandmother was probably crazy, and you walked 12 miles down a mountain to peddle them to widows whose husbands are overseas getting shot at. He shook his head. You ought to be ashamed. Maisie stood very still. She felt the yoke cutting into her shoulders. She felt the wool coat too warm in the April sun. She felt 18 years of being told she was nothing pressing down on her, like a roof that had finally decided to come in. She thought for one long second about setting the baskets down on the sidewalk and walking back up the mountain and never coming back. She did not. She lifted her chin. She said, Sir, my grandmother fed Mrs. Hester Bramble through the winter of '33 with these mushrooms, and Mrs. Bramble is still alive, and she's still eating them, and she said this morning they were the best food she ever had. Floyd Briscoe blinked. Maisie kept going. And if you don't want any, that's fine, but you do not get to tell me to be ashamed of feeding people, sir. She did not raise her voice. She did not cry. She did not move. Floyd Briscoe looked at her for a long second. Then he turned around and walked back into the feed store. Maisie stood on the sidewalk with her 2 heavy baskets and her grandmother's coat and her shoulders on fire. A woman across the street was watching her. The woman was maybe 30, thin, tired, a small child on her hip, another holding her skirt. The woman crossed the street. She stopped in front of the baskets. She looked at the mushrooms. Then she looked at Maisie. She said, How much for a pound of those? The oysters. 10 cents. The woman opened her purse. She counted out 10 cents in 3 coins. She put the coins in Maisie's hand. My name is Inez Ledford. My husband's in the Pacific. I haven't had anything fresh in 4 months." Maisie did not know what to say, so she opened the basket. She put a heaping pound of pearl oyster mushrooms into a piece of wax paper. She folded it carefully. She put it into Inez Ledford's hand. She said, "There's a little extra for the boys." Inez Ledford looked at her for one long moment. Then she nodded. She walked away. Maisie did not sell another mushroom that day, but she walked back up the mountain with 10 cents in her pocket and a piece of paper in her head that had a single name on it written in pencil, Inez Ledford. She walked all 12 miles. She did not feel tired. Inez Ledford came back the next Saturday. She brought her sister. The sister was named Ola Hightower. Older, wider, a face like a woman who had been keeping a coal stove lit for 30 winters and had no interest in being lied to. She stood at the foot of Maisie's wooden cart in the alley behind the Whitesville General Store and crossed her arms and stared into the baskets. "My sister says these things are good." "Yes, ma'am." "My sister has been wrong before." "Yes, ma'am." "How do you cook them?" "Butter, salt, hot pan, maybe a little garlic if you have it." "I have garlic." "Then you don't need anything else." Ola Hightower looked at her for a long second. Then she handed Maisie a quarter. "Give me 3 pounds." 3 pounds was triple what Inez had bought the week before. Maisie's hands shook as she wrapped them in wax paper, because that quarter was the first piece of real money she had earned in her whole life, because she could feel it warm from Ola's palm, because she suddenly understood that every pound she sold was somebody's supper, and every supper was somebody's small refusal to give up. Ola took the paper packets. She tucked them under her arm. She did not say thank you. But on her way out of the alley, she turned around and said, "Same time next week, and tell your grandmother she raised these right." Then she was gone. Maisie stood in the alley with 25 cents in her hand and her cheeks burning hot, because Ola Hightower did not know, because Ola Hightower thought Verena was still alive, because Ola Hightower thought there was a grandmother somewhere up that mountain doing the raising, and Maisie did not correct her, not because she was lying, but because for one bright second she thought maybe she is. Maybe a woman who builds a kingdom for you and writes you 47 letters and locks her own door with vines for 30 years, maybe a woman like that does not entirely die. Maybe she just goes somewhere quieter and keeps working. By the end of June, there was a line. 5 women on the first Saturday, 8 on the second, 12 on the third. By the Saturday before Independence Day, she was selling out before noon and walking home with $3.40 in her coat pocket and her hands smelling like wax paper. And then Hester Bramble came up the mountain. She came on a Friday afternoon in early May, old, maybe 70, a wool shawl pulled tight around her shoulders even in spring, a glass jar in one hand. The jar was full of dark amber honey. Maisie was behind the cabin, trying to figure out which of the 3 rusted axes in the woodshed was the one her grandmother had actually used. She turned around, and there was a woman at the corner of the cabin. "You the Whitfield girl." "Yes, ma'am." "Verena said you'd come." Maisie stared at her. "She told me back in 36, said she had a granddaughter in an orphanage in Charleston, and one day the girl would come for the cave." The woman took 2 steps forward. She looked Maisie up and down, like she was inspecting a horse, or a sermon, or both. "You're skinnier than I expected." Maisie did not know what to say, so she said nothing. The woman walked past her and up the back step into the cabin like she had been doing it for 40 years. Maisie followed. The woman set the honey on the table. Then she saw the letters. She stopped. She looked. Her face did not move. Then she said, "So she did get them out of you." Maisie blinked. "Ma'am, Verena thought they might be in the cave somewhere. She told me she was going to hide them in case in case the girl ever gets here, and the nuns never let her see them. I want her to have them, even if it takes her 30 years to find them." The woman turned around. She held out her hand. It was hard, lined, browned by sun, the hand of a person who had been wringing things out of life for 70 years and was not about to stop now. "Hester Bramble, I live 2 miles down the creek. Your grandmother brought me a basket of mushrooms once a week for 20 years, best food I ever ate. When she got too old to tend them, she sealed up the cave, said it would keep till you arrived." Maisie took her hand. "Magnolia, I know what your name is, girl. She told me." Hester squeezed her hand once, hard, not unkindly. Then she let go. "Now, you eaten anything in the last 2 days?" "There was an apple." "An apple is not eating." "Yes, ma'am." "Sit down." Maisie sat. Hester went to the stove, lit it, cut a slice of bread from a loaf she had brought in her shawl, put it on a plate, poured the honey over it, set it in front of Maisie. "Eat that slow. Don't gobble. Your stomach's not used to anything good." Maisie ate slow. The honey tasted like the inside of a sunlit hour. It tasted like a meadow in July. It tasted like the kind of thing a person could believe in. Hester sat across the table. She did not speak. She watched Maisie eat. When the bread was gone, Hester stood up. "I'll be back Tuesday with cornmeal and a wool blanket I don't need anymore, and maybe a chicken if I can spare one." "Why?" Maisie had not meant to ask it. It just came out. Hester turned in the doorway. She looked at Maisie for a long second. Then she said, "Because your grandmother fed me through the winter of 33, when my husband died and I had nothing on the table but a sack of meal and half a jar of salt. She walked 2 miles down that creek every Sunday for 4 months with a basket of mushrooms and dried beans, and never once let me thank her properly." She paused. "I owe her, and I figure feeding her granddaughter is as close to paying her back as I'm gonna get." She did not wait for Maisie to respond. She just walked out. Maisie sat at the table with the empty plate. For the first time in 8 years, she did not feel alone. By August, she had what Hester called the hollow women. It was 4 of them: Hester, Inez, Ola, and a quiet seamstress named Bertie Halcombe, whose husband had been killed at Pearl Harbor, and who had not spoken above a whisper in 8 months. They came up the mountain Friday afternoons. They worked through Saturday morning. They walked back down Saturday afternoon with mushrooms and a small share of the money. By September, Bertie Halcombe was speaking in a regular voice again. She did not say so. She did not announce it. She just talked across the work table about the weather, about her sister-in-law, about the price of sugar. The first time it happened, Hester and Maisie looked at each other across the room and did not say a word, but Maisie put her hand against the wooden beam of the cabin where she stood, and she thought, this is what Verena built. Not the cave, not exactly. The cave was just where she put it. What she built was the room that women come into and come out of. A little different. It was in early October that Maisie found the grave. She had been clearing the brush behind the cabin, pulling up brambles that had crept up against the foundation. She had a pair of leather gloves from Pruitt's wife and a small hatchet and a back that ached. She pulled a tangle of wild grape away from the back wall, and underneath the wild grape there was a fence, a small wooden fence, 4 posts, 3 rails, about 6 feet by 4, hand-built. the wood weathered silver, the corners notched and pegged, no nails. Inside the fence, wild roses, pink, just past blooming, the hips already starting to swell red. Maisie stood there. She thought a garden, a little garden. She kept a little garden back here, but then she looked closer because there was something at the head of the fence, a stone set flat against the back wall, half covered in moss. Maisie knelt down. She brushed the moss away with her gloved hand. The stone was river rock, smooth, round, about the size of a dinner plate. Someone had carved letters into the face of it, carved them deep, with great care, the way you carve something you intend to last. The letters said, Lisbeth Whitfield, 1903 to 1934, my daughter, my heart, come home. Maisie sat down. She sat down hard, in the dirt, in her grandmother's wool coat, behind her grandmother's cabin, in front of her mother's grave. Because her mother was here. Her mother had been here the whole time. The state had told her your mother died of consumption in Logan County in November of 1934. She was buried in a charity plot. There are no records of the burial. There is nothing for you to visit. The state had told her your mother was a stranger to us. We do not know what she did. We do not know who she was. We have given you to the diocese because there is no one else. 8 years. 8 years Maisie had carried the lie of a charity plot in Logan County. 8 years she had pictured a stretch of wet ground without a marker. 8 years she had told herself that her mother did not have a place, did not have a stone, did not have a name pressed into anything anywhere in the world, except her mother had a stone. Her mother had a name. Her mother had been carried home by a woman who had been told no in an office in Charleston when she tried to take Maisie too, by a woman who had built a fence with her own hands and planted roses and carved into river rock the words, "Come home." Maisie put her face against the stone. The stone was cold. The moss was damp. The wild rose hips smelled like the inside of a teacup. She did not cry because she did not have any tears left for what was being done to her. She just lay against her mother's stone in the October sun, and she said 2 words out loud to Lisbeth Whitfield, born 1903, died 1934, daughter of Verena, mother of Magnolia, buried behind a cabin in Kenny's Creek Hollow, with a stone and a fence and a garden. She said, I'm here. She walked back to the cabin after a long time. She sat at the table. The 1934 journal was on the top shelf. She had not read it yet. She had been moving through the journals in order. She was still in 1922. She did not move toward it now, because something in her had decided that whatever was in the 1934 journal, she was not ready for today. So she ate a piece of bread, and she lit the lantern, and she went back to the cave, because the cave was where she went now when she could not be in the world. A week later, the dark green truck came back. She had seen it 3 times already since April, always at the foot of the path, always slowing, never stopping. But this time the truck stopped. It did not turn up the path. It just stopped. At the bottom, engine running, a man got out. He was about 50, heavy wool overcoat, a polished gray hat, a gold ring on his right hand that caught the afternoon light when he raised his hand to shade his eyes and looked up the path. He looked for about 30 seconds. Then he got back in the truck. He drove away. Maisie had been at the spring above the cabin, filling a bucket. She had seen him. She walked down to the foot of the path after he was gone. There were tire tracks, 2 of them, deep, recent, pressed into the soft clay. She stood there a long time. She thought of Orrin Pruitt on the morning he had come up with the basket. Somebody is going to come. She walked back up to the cabin. She walked past the cabin. She walked into the cave. She walked through the cathedral. She walked past the heated chamber, past the underground orchard. She walked all the way to the far wall. She had been here many times now. She knew every shelf, every log, every glow, but she had never noticed the thing she noticed today, a stack of poplar logs against the far wall, arranged in a way that almost, but not quite, hid a vertical fissure in the limestone, about 3 feet wide. She set the lantern down. She moved the logs. It took an hour. The logs were big. Some of them were inoculated. She handled them carefully. She had learned by now that the substrate inside a log was a living thing. She moved them gently, like moving someone sleeping. When the last log came away, there was an opening, a passage, about 15 feet long, half blocked by what looked at first like a natural rockfall. Except it wasn't natural, because the rocks were limestone slabs cut to roughly the same size, stacked in a wall, like masonry, like a person who had wanted to discourage casual visitors, but make it possible for a determined one to get through. Maisie cleared the wall. It took 2 days. Her hands bled again, the same places they had bled in March. When the last slab came down, she stood up. She lifted the lantern. She squeezed through into the space beyond, and she stopped, because she was standing in another chamber, smaller, maybe 25 feet across, drier, the air here different, not damp, steady, cool. The walls were limestone, but Verena had built shelves into them, wooden shelves, pine, hand-cut, pegged together without a single nail. The shelves ran from floor to ceiling on every wall, and on the shelves were jars, mason jars, canning jars, old medicine bottles, apothecary jars, anything glass with a tight seal, not hundreds, not 300, 1,847. She counted them later, twice, to be sure, because the number itself was so impossible that she did not trust it the first time. 1,847 jars, each one labeled, each one with a name, a year, a place, a person, the labels in 2 languages, English, and the Cherokee her grandmother had used in the cabin. Maisie stepped closer. She lifted the lantern higher. She read the nearest label, Cherokee Trail of Tears Bean, from my mother. 1894. She read the next, Hollow Ridge Red Corn, from Lou in Mingo County. 1902. She said this strain was already considered lost. She read the next, Candy Roaster Squash, from the Snowbird community. 1907. The next, Greasy Back Bean. 1911. The next, Cherokee White Eagle Corn, from my mother's cousin Wasi. 1905. Maisie set the lantern down on the floor. She walked the perimeter of the chamber. She read every label she could in an hour. There were dates going back to the 1880s, place names she did not recognize, family names that had been passed down, tribal designations, notes in the margins holds well through July, needs hard frost to germinate, sister of the variety on shelf 9, and at the back of the chamber, at the very back, where the floor sloped down a little and the air smelled faintly of cedar and old smoke, there was an altar, stone, hand-laid, limestone slabs, 6 feet square, raised about a foot off the floor. On top of the altar, a flat piece of cedar wood, burned with symbols Maisie did not know, Cherokee symbols, but older than the script in the labels, older than the angular script, pictographic, spirals, birds, a tree with 7 branches. In the center of the altar, a small clay bowl, empty, smooth from many hands across many years, and carved into the limestone at the base of the altar, a date, 1764. Maisie sank down to the cold stone floor because her grandmother had not built this chamber. This chamber was older than her grandmother by 150 years. Her grandmother had not started this. Her grandmother had not invented this. Her grandmother had not been the first. Her grandmother had only what? Continued. The thought sat in Maisie's chest. Continued. She got up, slowly. She walked along the far wall, the wall she had not yet examined. There was a small door cut into it, a door made of cedar planks, black with age. She opened it. Behind it, a small alcove, the size of a closet, and in the alcove, floor to ceiling, wrapped in oilcloth, tied with leather thongs, books, handwritten books, hundreds of them. Maisie took down the nearest one. She untied the leather. She unwrapped the oilcloth. The book was a journal, pine board cover, the pages thick, hand-cut, stitched with sinew. She opened to the first page. The handwriting was not her grandmother's. The date on the first page was 1847. The name on the first page, she could not read it. It was in Cherokee. She put the book back. She took down another, and another, and another. The dates went back, and back, and back. The oldest journal she could find, at the very bottom of the stack, was dated 1781. Maisie sat down on the cold floor with the 1781 journal in her lap, and the symbols on the cedar wood above her, and the 1847 jars surrounding her in 3 tiers of pine shelving, and she understood. Her grandmother had been the seventh keeper of something that had been kept since before her grandmother's grandmother was born. She sat in the seed vault for a long time. The lantern burned low. She did not cry, because crying was not what this called for. What this called for was something else. What this called for was the kind of stillness you go into when you understand that you have just walked into a room that has been waiting for you for a long time. She walked back to the cabin in the dark. She did not eat supper. She sat on the porch. She watched the stars come up over the ridge, and she thought, I am not going to be allowed to keep this. She did not know why she thought it, but she thought it, plain as a sentence read aloud. 3 nights later, Wendell Crane arrived. She did not hear him coming, because the wind was up, because she was at the kitchen table sorting Trail of Tears beans into a glass jar, because the lantern was throwing such a soft light against the wall that she had forgotten the world had a dark side. Then 3 taps at the door, soft, polite, the way a person knocks who is not sure they should be knocking. Maisie froze, because nobody came up the path after dark, because the only people in the world who knew where she lived were the Hollow women, Anne Pruitt, and Maisie thought of the gold ring catching the afternoon light, and her stomach turned. She picked up the kerosene lantern. She walked to the door. She opened it. There was a man on the porch, young, maybe 24, holding his hat in his hands, a wool cap, cheap, the kind a soldier wears when he has just come home and has not yet been able to afford anything else. He had a scar across his left cheekbone, pale, healed, but recent, the kind of scar a piece of shrapnel makes when it grazes you, instead of stopping for tea. He had blue eyes, very blue, tired blue. He had a small canvas duffel at his feet. He cleared his throat. Miss Whitfield? Yes. My name is Wendell Crane. I am from Mingo County. I read a piece by a Dr. Penhallow about a young woman who had a collection of seeds her grandmother kept. He paused. I came home from North Africa 6 weeks ago. I have been trying to find a reason to get out of my mother's house ever since. I studied agriculture at West Virginia University for 2 semesters before I enlisted. He paused. He looked down at his hat. Then he looked back up. Ma'am, I don't have anywhere to be, and I think I would like to learn from you, if you would have me. Maisie stood in the doorway. She held the lantern. The lantern light shook a little in her hand. She thought, this is too convenient. She thought he could be one of the gold ring man's men. She thought, what kind of fool just shows up at a stranger's cabin in the dark? She thought he looks tired. She thought he looks the way I look. She did not know what to do. So she did the thing that nobody at the Sisters of Mercy home had ever once done for her. She did the thing she had been trying to do for everyone she had met since she walked out of that gate barefoot in March. She stepped back. She held the door open. She said, "Have you eaten?" Wendell Crane blinked. Then he said very quietly, "No, ma'am." She let him in. She made him a plate. She gave him the chair her grandmother had used. The lantern light fell on the table between them and lit up the unfinished letter at the center of the circle. The one that said, "When you come, my magnolia, remember that I have loved you since the day Wendell Crane looked at it." He did not ask what it was. He just looked at it for a long moment. Then he said, "Whoever wrote that loved you very much." Maisie sat across from him. She said she did. He looked up at her. His eyes were so tired, but they were kind. She said, "And there's a man with a gold ring who has been driving past my path, and I think he is going to try and take everything she left me." Wendell Crane did not blink. He said, "Then I guess we are going to need to figure out how to stop him." He said it like it was decided, like he had not just arrived, like he was not a stranger, like he was already part of whatever happened next. Maisie put her hands flat on the table. She felt the wood, the same wood her grandmother had pressed her own palms against. The night she wrote the unfinished sentence, the night before her hands stopped moving, she looked across the table at Wendell Crane, and she said, "All right." The man with the gold ring came up the path 9 days later. He was punctual. He arrived at 1:58 in the afternoon in the dark green truck. He stepped out wearing a brown tweed suit and a brown felt hat and a pair of polished Oxford shoes that did not belong on a mountain. The gold ring on his right hand caught the light. A second man got out of the passenger side, younger, thin, carrying a leather briefcase. The gold ring man did not introduce him. Hester was sitting on the porch. Maisie had asked her to be there. Hester had not asked why. Hester had brought her knitting and a thermos of coffee and an expression that suggested she could outwait the second coming of Christ if she had to. Wendell was inside the cabin, out of sight, listening. The gold ring man walked up to the porch. He removed his hat. "Miss Whitfield, Mr. Augustus Reinhardt, Reinhardt Botanical Holdings, out of Chicago. All right, may I sit?" Hester did not move her bag off the second chair. Reinhardt stood. "I am sorry about your grandmother." "Are you?" He paused. He recovered. He smiled. Of course, she and Reinhardt had a long and mutually beneficial relationship. Hester's knitting needles clicked twice. Maisie said nothing. Reinhardt nodded to the man with the briefcase. The man stepped forward. He opened the briefcase. He took out a folder. He took out a document. He handed it to Reinhardt. Reinhardt took it. He held it out to Maisie. "Miss Whitfield, This is a scientific research agreement your grandmother signed with Reinhardt Botanical Holdings on March the 8th of 1939. Under the terms of this agreement, Verena Whitfield conveyed to Reinhardt in perpetuity all rights to the biological research materials cultivated on this property, including but not limited to fungal cultures, seed stocks, plant cultivars, and associated cultivation techniques. He paused. In exchange, Reinhardt paid your grandmother the sum of $300 per year for the remainder of her life. He looked at Maisie. In other words, Miss Whitfield, the seeds and the mushrooms and the methods are not yours to keep. He smiled. They are ours. Maisie took the document. She held it in both hands. Her vision swam for a second. Because that was the third twist of the knife. Because Verena had never taken money from anyone in her life. Because there was no record of $300 a year anywhere. Not in any journal, not in any letter, not in the cabin, not in the cave. Because she looked at the signature at the bottom. Verena Whitfield. The handwriting was not Verena's. It was close. It was very close. But it was not hers, because Maisie had now read 47 letters and 6 journals and an unfinished sentence in Verena's actual hand. And she knew the way Verena made her V's, with a small open loop at the bottom, like a slingshot. The V at the bottom of this contract was closed, and tidy, like someone copying. Maisie looked up. She said, "This is a forgery." Reinhardt's smile did not move, but something behind his eyes did. "I beg your pardon. My grandmother did not sign this. Her V is different. Miss Whitfield, forgive me, but you are 18 years old." "That's right." She did not know why she said it. She just did. "You are 18 years old," Reinhardt said, slower now, like she was a child. "And you are not a handwriting expert, and you are not a lawyer, and you have not had the privilege of an education that would equip you to evaluate a federal contract. He took the document back. He returned it to the briefcase man. "We are giving you 90 days to deliver the entire seed inventory and all cultivation records and all field journals to our offices in Chicago. After 90 days, we will file suit. We will obtain a court order, and we will return with U.S. Marshals to take possession of what is legally ours." Hester's needle stopped. Reinhardt did not look at her. He looked at Maisie. "I would strongly encourage you to make this easy on yourself." He put his hat back on. He turned to walk down the porch steps. He paused on the second step. He turned around. He said, "Your grandmother was a fascinating woman, Miss Whitfield, but she did not understand the modern world. She was a relic of a vanishing era. Hybrid seeds are the future of American agriculture. The seeds in that cave are the past." He smiled. "You don't owe the past anything." He walked down the steps. He got in the truck. He drove away. Hester and Maisie sat on the porch for a long time after the sound of the engine had died. Then Hester said, "Did you see his ring?" "Yes." "That ring, what about it?" "That's a Reinhardt ring. He's wearing it because he wants you to know he's not a man. He's a company." She turned her head toward Maisie. "And a company will eat you, child. It will eat you, and it will smile while it does." Maisie did not respond. She was looking at the path where the dark green truck had been. She said, "My grandmother did not sign that paper." "I know. He thinks I am too small to fight him." "He's right that you are small." Maisie turned and looked at Hester. Hester looked back. "He's wrong about everything else." That night Maisie sat at the kitchen table with the unfinished letter at the center of the circle of 47. She did not light a fire. She did not eat. She did not sleep. She got up. She went to the shelf. She took down the 1934 journal, the one she had not been ready for, the one she had been moving toward for months, the way you move towards something heavy, by circling it first. She brought it to the table. She opened it to the first page. Wendell sat across from her. He did not speak. He just watched her face. The 1934 journal started in January. Verena's hand was strong then. The ink was bold. Maisie read, January, February, March, April. The entries were about the cave, about the seed vault, about a Cherokee woman from the Qualla Boundary who had written to Verena and was thinking of coming to visit. And then, the entry for May the 17th, Lisbeth is here. She came at midnight. Wendell drove her. She is bleeding. She has a child wrapped in a coat against her chest. The child is 10 years old. The child has not slept in 2 days. Maisie's hands stopped moving. She read the line again. Wendell drove her. She looked up. Wendell Crane was watching her. She said, "Was your father?" He nodded, once, slow. "My father drove a woman named Lisbeth Whitfield to a cabin in Kenny's Creek Hollow in May of 1934. I was 16 years old. He told me about it the night he died, in 1939. He told me her name. He told me she was hurt. He told me she had a daughter. He told me he had driven all night." He paused. "He told me he never knew what happened to either of them." Maisie's hand was shaking. She turned the page. "Lisbeth says they came to the lab in Lexington 2 nights ago. She says 3 men. She says they had been pressuring her for 6 months to turn over her father's papers. She says they offered money. She says she refused. She says they came back with something else. Lisbeth has a wound below the ribs. I do not think she will survive. I do not think she knows." Maisie made a sound. She did not know what kind of sound. It came out of her without permission. She kept reading. "She has told me everything. The men work for a company called Reinhardt. They have been buying up seed lines for 10 years. They want to patent what they cannot buy. Lisbeth had the last documented strain of Aunt Belle's white corn. She refused them 6 times. They came on a Saturday. They told her this was the last visit. She thought they meant a paper. She was wrong. She drove. She did not stop. She arrived at midnight. She is asleep now on the floor by the stove. Magnolia is asleep beside her. The girl has not let go of her mother's coat in 5 hours. Maisie turned another page. Her vision was going. Lisbeth died this morning at 6. I have buried her behind the cabin. I have built a fence. I have planted roses I brought up from the south slope. The child is still here. I cannot keep her. I cannot keep her because Reinhardt will come. Because Reinhardt already knows the name Whitfield. Because Lisbeth told me before she went that they had a list, and our name was on it. And they would not stop with her. If they find Magnolia here, they will take her. They will take her the way they took Lisbeth. To get to me, to get to what is in the cave, I have to send her somewhere. I have to send her where they will not look. I have written to a friend in Pittsburgh. She knows a sister at the Sisters of Mercy in Charleston. The sister will take her, quietly, without paperwork that names me, without anything that connects. Magnolia cannot know. Magnolia must never know, because if Magnolia knows, Magnolia will try to come back, and Magnolia must not come back until I am dead, and the company has either come and gone, or God forbid taken what they wanted and lost interest. She is asleep on the rocking chair. She is 10 years old. Her hair is the color of her mother's. She is the only thing of Lisbeth left in the world, and I am sending her away. I am sending her to strangers. I am letting her believe I do not want her, because that is the only way to keep her alive. God forgive me." Maisie closed the journal, slowly, with both hands. She did not move. The room had gone very quiet. Wendell did not speak. Hester, who had stayed the night and was on the rocking chair, did not move. Maisie put both hands on the table. She thought, "She didn't leave me. She thought she was protecting me. She thought the orphanage was not the world rejecting me. The orphanage was the place she put me, to keep me alive. She thought 8 years I thought I was alone. 8 years I thought I was unwanted. 8 years she was sitting in this cabin, writing me letters, knowing she could not come for me, because if she came for me, he would find me. 8 years." She slid down out of the chair. She did not faint. She just went down, slowly, the way a candle goes down, when the wax has finished giving. She sat on the floor with her back against the table leg. She looked at the unfinished sentence at the center of the circle. "When you come, my magnolia, remember that I have loved you since the day." She knew now. She knew what day. The day Lisbeth Whitfield rode in a truck up a mountain, bleeding, with a 10-year-old girl asleep against her chest. The day Verena Whitfield opened her door at midnight and saw her daughter dying and her granddaughter holding on, and made a choice to save the one she could. Maisie put her hands over her face, and she sat on the floor of the cabin her grandmother had built, and she cried for the woman who had loved her enough to let her go, and for the mother she had not been allowed to remember, and for the lie she had been carrying, and for the 8 years she had spent useful, unsoftened, counting things when she could not feel her hands. She cried for a long time, and when she was done, Wendell Crane was sitting beside her on the floor. He had not said a word. He had just come around the table and sat down, close enough that she could feel the warmth of him, far enough that she did not have to feel anything she did not want to. He said one thing. He said she had a plan. She had a plan, and she ran out of time. "We are going to finish what she started." Maisie nodded against her hands. Outside, the wind moved through the rhododendrons. Inside, the lantern burned low, and up the path, somewhere in the dark of Kenny's Creek Hollow, the dark green truck was driving back to Chicago, carrying a man with a gold ring who thought he had 90 days, and a forged signature, and a girl too small to fight back. He was wrong about all three. Theron Quill drove up the mountain 3 weeks later in a black sedan that had been polished to such a high shine that the trees moved across it like passing weather. He was 48, wire glasses, a gray suit with a vest, a leather satchel, the kind of mustache that meant either a math professor or a Pinkerton. He was a lawyer. He worked out of an office in Charleston. He had been recommended by Dr. Penhallow's brother, who taught law at Marshall. He sat at Maisie's table for 4 hours. He read every letter Reinhardt had sent. He read the contract 3 times. He read Verena's actual signatures in the journals. He held the forgery up against the light. He held it up against the unfinished sentence on the kitchen table. Then he set the contract down, and he removed his glasses, and he polished them with a square of flannel, and he said, "Miss Whitfield, this document is a forgery. I know, and not a particularly good one. I know that too." He paused. "It does not matter that it is a forgery." Maisie blinked. "It doesn't. It does not matter, Miss Whitfield, because Reinhardt will not have to prove it is real. You will have to prove it is fake. And in a courtroom in West Virginia in 1943, Reinhardt will bring 3 witnesses who swear they saw your grandmother sign. They will bring a paid handwriting expert who swears the V is consistent. They will bring photographs of an office where she allegedly signed. He paused. And you will have what? He waited. Maisie said, I will have the truth. The truth, Miss Whitfield, without documentation, is a candle in a hurricane. Wendell leaned forward. What do we need? Theron Quill turned to him. You need a piece of paper that predates the contract, something written by Verena Whitfield herself, properly notarized, witness filed, that establishes either her ownership of the seeds or her intent to convey them elsewhere. He paused. And if no such paper exists, then your young Miss Whitfield will spend the next 10 years in court and likely lose. The room was quiet. The wood stove ticked. A piece of kindling settled. Hester looked at her hands. Maisie sat very still. She thought of Orrin Pruitt on a cold March afternoon in a truck. Something I am going to tell you about tomorrow. She thought of him on her porch with a basket. Somebody is going to come. She thought of the look on his face in his office, the way he had said, that Miss Whitfield is something your grandmother knew, and I do not. She said there might be something. The Quill looked at her. There might be. She stood up. I need to talk to Mr. Pruitt. The winter of 1942 to 1943 was the coldest in Boone County in 20 years. The creek froze. The path froze. The roof of the tool shed sagged. The thermometer on the cabin window read 11 degrees on a Tuesday in January. Maisie spent 2 days propping the shed with cut saplings while the snow came down on her shoulders in slow, patient sheets. She lost weight. She was already thin. She lost more. Hester brought soup. Bertie brought a wool sweater. Inez sent a jar of apple butter down the mountain with her oldest boy. The cave kept producing. That was the thing. The cave did not care about the snow. Inside the limestone walls, it was still 55 degrees, still 90% humidity, still the same constant breathing dark Verena had known would hold steady, regardless of what the surface world was doing. The mushrooms kept coming. The hollow women kept selling. And Wendell stayed. He slept on a cot Maisie set up by the wood stove. He did not ask for anything. He cut firewood. He patched the roof. He drove to Whitesville every Friday for supplies. He learned the rows. He learned the substrate. He learned the way the heat pipes had to be bled in January. He did not ask Maisie to talk. He did not ask her questions. He just stayed. By the second week of January, she had stopped flinching when he came through the door. By the third, she was leaving a second cup on the table without thinking about it. By the fourth, she caught herself smiling at the way he held a seed, like a watchmaker, like a man diffusing something, like he understood already what the women in her family had always understood, that a seed was just a small folded life waiting for permission to open. The woman came in January. She came on the coldest morning of the year, snow up to the porch railing, the thermometer reading 11 degrees, wind off the ridge that cut through every layer of wool a person could put on. Maisie was at the woodpile. She did not hear the rented horse coming up the path. Because of the wind, she just turned around to carry an armload into the cabin, and there was a woman standing at the edge of the yard, around 50, brown skin, silver-streaked hair in a long braid down her back, a heavy wool blanket wrapped around her shoulders, a small leather satchel at her side, and a pair of dark eyes that looked at Maisie with a kind of recognition Maisie had never received from any stranger in her life, like the woman already knew her, like she had been waiting. The woman said, "Are you Magnolia?" "I am. My name is Awinita Standing Water." "All right. I am from the Qualla boundary in North Carolina." "All right. I read about you in a publication of Dr. Penhallow's about seed varieties. I have been traveling for 2 days. Maisie set the firewood down. She said, "Come inside." The woman came inside. Maisie made tea. The woman did not speak while the kettle worked. She just sat in Verena's rocking chair and looked at the cabin. She looked at the walls. She looked at the herb jars. She looked at the diagrams pinned above the bed. She looked at the table where the unfinished letter still sat at the center of the circle of 47. She looked at all of it slowly, like a woman reading a long passage in a language she had been forbidden to speak as a child. When the tea was ready, Maisie set the cup in her hands. Abuelita took a sip. She closed her eyes. She said, "Mountain mint with sour wood honey and a little wild bergamot." Maisie blinked. "How did you know?" The woman opened her eyes. She said, "Because my grandmother taught my mother, and my mother taught me, and we taught it to our cousin Verena before she left." Maisie did not move. She did not breathe. Abuelita, standing water, set down the tea. She reached into the satchel. She took out something wrapped in a square of muslin. She unfolded the muslin on her lap. It was a photograph, a small one, brown at the edges, mounted on stiff board. 2 girls in a yard, standing in front of a cabin that was not this cabin, but had the same low porch and the same plank door and the same kind of mountain rising in the background. 2 girls, one older, one younger, holding hands. Abuelita Standing Water held the photograph out. Maisie took it. Her hand was shaking. She did not know yet what was about to happen, but she knew something was about to happen. She felt it in the way the cabin had gone still around her, in the way Wendell had stopped sweeping by the door and put down the broom, in the way the wood stove ticked once and did not tick again. Abuelita said, "This is my mother, Atohi Standing Water." She was 6 years old when this was taken, the summer of 1884. She paused. She tapped the older girl in the photograph, the one on the right, holding the smaller girl's hand, looking at the camera with eyes that even at 9 were already eyes Maisie knew. She said, "And this is her older sister. Her name was Wilma Standing Water. She was 9. She paused. When she left the Kuala boundary in 1890, she changed her name. She started calling herself Verena Whitfield. Maisie set the photograph down on the table very carefully. She put her hands flat on either side of it. She looked at the woman. She said, "I'm sorry. I don't." She could not finish the sentence. Abuelita Standing Water said, "Your grandmother was Cherokee Magnolia. She was my mother's older sister, which makes you my mother's grandniece, which makes you mine." Maisie sat down. She did not remember sitting down. She was just sitting. Abuelita reached across the table. She put her hand on top of Maisie's. Her hand was warm. Her palm was rough. She said, "My mother told me about Wilma her whole life. She said her sister had gone north. She said her sister had taken seeds and knowledge and a promise that one day she would come back. She never did. We did not know why. We thought maybe she had married or died or forgotten us." She paused. We did not know she was saving everything. She squeezed Maisie's hand. We did not know she was saving us. Maisie cried. She had not cried like this before in her life. This was different. This was the kind of crying that comes when a door you did not know was locked suddenly comes open, and on the other side is everyone you thought you had lost. She cried for a long time. Abuelita Standing Water sat across from her, did not speak, did not reach for her, just sat, the way a mountain sits with someone, just sat. When Maisie could breathe again, Abuelita said, "You have a name, child." Maisie looked up. Awinita said, "Your great-grandmother named all her granddaughters before they were born. She had a name for you. She had it in her heart for 50 years. She told my mother, and my mother told me, and I carried it across 2 states in 1 mountain to give it to you." Maisie waited. Awinita said, "Your name is Salali. It means little squirrel, because the little squirrel gathers and saves and remembers where she put things and feeds her family through winters that try to kill them." She paused. "It is the name you were always going to have, if anyone had ever asked." Maisie put her hand over her mouth. She nodded. She could not speak. Awinita said, "I will stay through February, if you will have me." Maisie nodded again, hard, like a child. Awinita stayed 5 weeks. She slept in Hester's spare room down the creek. She came up the mountain every morning with a satchel of dried herbs and a small handwritten Cherokee primer she had made herself. She taught Maisie the names of plants. She taught her the names of the months. She taught her 3 songs her mother had taught her when she was 4 years old. She taught her how to say, "I am here," in a language her grandmother had spoken in the dark of that very cabin for 30 years and never written down. She taught her how to say, "You are loved." She taught her how to say "Wado," which means thank you. Awinita took her into the seed chamber on a Sunday afternoon, lantern in hand. She walked the rows. She read the labels Verena had written in Cherokee. She translated them for Maisie, her voice low, her finger hovering above each jar. She paused at the trail of tears beans. She paused for a long time. She said, "My great-grandmother carried these beans in her hair. When she was forced to walk to Oklahoma, she did not go. She turned back at the river. She hid in the mountains for 2 years. She came home. The beans came home with her." Maisie put her hand on the jar. She said, "My grandmother kept them. Your grandmother kept them, child, for me, for you." Awinita set down the lantern. She turned to Maisie. She said, "You are not a girl from an orphanage in Charleston, Magnolia." She said, "You are a Cherokee woman who was raised in a building." She said, "There's a difference." It was on a Friday in late February that Maisie found the box. She was in the seed chamber, cataloging. She had been working through the journals in the alcove, trying to put them in order by year. She had pulled out the 1781 journal first, and the 1815, and the 1842, behind them at the very back of the alcove, against the limestone wall. There was a wooden case, cedar, about the size of a hat box, set up on a pine block to keep it off the stone floor, wrapped in oilcloth that had been waxed against the damp. She unwrapped it carefully. She lifted the lid. Inside, packed in cotton wool, there was a phonograph cylinder, a wax cylinder, the kind people had used before the war, before records, before radio became what it became, the kind a person had to hand record on, with a brass horn and a needle and a foot pedal. She had never used one. She had only ever seen pictures. Beneath the cylinder, in the bottom of the case, was a folded note. She lifted it out. She opened it. It was in Verena's handwriting, trembling. The last hand, the hand of the unfinished sentence. "My Magnolia, I do not have the strength to finish writing what I need to say to you. My hands are no longer mine. Mr. Pruitt's son-in-law brought up his recording machine in October. He let me borrow it for 1 afternoon. I have made you this, because I want you to hear me. Even if you cannot read what I tried to write, Mr. Pruitt has the player. Ask him for it. He will know what to do. Be brave, Salali. Be brave." Maisie folded the note. She put it back in the box. She picked up the cedar case with both hands, like something newborn. She walked out of the cave. She walked down the path. She walked the 8 miles to Orrin Pruitt's office in Whitesville, in the snow, in her grandmother's coat, with Wendell beside her, because she could not wait until morning, because she could not have waited 1 more hour. Orrin Pruitt was at his desk when she came through the door. He looked up. He saw the cedar case in her hands. He stood up. He said, "Oh," that was all. Just "oh." The way a man says it when the thing he has been waiting 20 years to see has just walked into the room. He went to a cabinet in the corner. He opened it. He brought out a phonograph player, Edison model, brass horn, a foot pedal that took 2 minutes to clean. He set it on his desk. He looked at Maisie. He said, "She told me you would come." He said, "She did not tell me when." He said, "But she told me you would." He set up the cylinder. He set the needle. He stepped back. He nodded to Maisie. "You'll want to do it yourself." Maisie put her hand on the crank. She turned it. The cylinder spun. The needle dropped. For a moment there was nothing, just a soft scratch of wax, the hiss of October air, the distant sound of wind through an open cabin window. Then a voice, old, trembling, but clear. "Magnolia." Maisie's hand went to her mouth. "My Magnolia." She had heard the voice of every woman in her life, the voices of nuns, the voices of girls, the voices of Hester, and Inez, and Bertie, and Awinita. She had never heard this voice, but she knew it, the way you know a song you have been hearing in your sleep for as long as you can remember. I do not know if you will ever hear this. Mr. Pruitt has it now. He is a good man. He will keep it for you, if you come. A pause, a breath. I want to finish the letter. The letter I was writing the night my hand gave out. I want to finish it, because I do not want you to have to guess what I meant. Maisie's knees were giving. Wendell put a hand on her shoulder. He held her up. I wrote, "When you come, my Magnolia. Remember that I have loved you since the day." Verena's voice paused, steadied. "Since the day I took you out of the hands of the nurse in the back room of Mr. Pruitt's office. In May of 1934, you were 10 years old. You were holding a blue scarf that had belonged to your mother. You had not slept in 3 days. You did not cry when I picked you up. You did not cry because you had already learned not to. I held you for an hour, Magnolia. I held you while we drove down to Charleston that night. I held you, and I told you everything I was going to spend the next 8 years not being allowed to tell you. I told you I was your grandmother. I told you I loved you. I told you that one day when the world was less dangerous than it was that night, I would come for you, and I would bring you home." A long pause. "I did not get to keep that promise. I am sorry. I am so sorry, my Magnolia. But I left you the cave. I left you the seeds. I left you the letters. And I left you this, so that even if I could not be there, you would know. You would know that you are not a child the world threw away. You are a child I sent into hiding because they were coming, and the only way I could keep you alive was to put you somewhere they would not look. You are my granddaughter. You are Lisbeth's daughter. You are Atohi's grandniece. You are the great-granddaughter of a woman who walked back from the river. You are Cherokee on your mother's side and on mine. You are Salali, and you are loved. You have been loved every single day of your life. You have been loved by women whose names you do not know yet, women who held you in their hearts while you sat in a building and ate gray potatoes. You were never alone, Magnolia. You were just far away. A pause, the longest one. Be brave, Salali. Plant the seeds. Tell their stories, speak the names, feed people, build the room that women come into and come out of a little different. That is the room. That is the room I was building from the day they put you on that bus. I love you, my magnolia, my moonflower, my little squirrel, my granddaughter. I will be in the cave. I will be in every jar. I will be in every glowing thing that grows in the dark for you. I will be the room, and I will be waiting whenever you need me to come and sit down and put your hands on the table and feel them. I am here. You are loved. When you come, I am here. The cylinder hissed. The needle lifted. The wax went silent. The room was so quiet you could hear the snow falling outside on the bricks of Whitesville. Maisie sat down on the floor of Orrin Pruitt's office. She sat with her back against his desk. She put her hands over her face, and she did not get up for 3 hours. When she could speak again, Orrin Pruitt was sitting in his chair watching her, quietly, like a man who had been guarding something for 9 years and had finally been given permission to set it down. He stood up. He walked to a heavy iron safe in the corner of the office. He turned the dial. Slow, right, left, right. The tumblers clicked. He opened the door. He reached in. He took out a manila envelope. It was thick, yellowed at the edges, tied with cotton string that had begun to fray. He set it on the desk. He sat down. He looked at Maisie. He said, "Your grandmother walked into this office on August 14th of 1933. She paid me $22, which was a great deal of money in that year. She had me draw up a set of papers. She had me file the originals with the Boone County Courthouse. She had me notarize a copy, and she left this envelope with me, with instructions that it not be opened until either she died or somebody tried to take what was inside her cave." He paused. "She died in December, and I received your letter from Mr. Quill last week." He pushed the envelope across the desk. "It seems both have now happened." Maisie did not move. She looked at the envelope. Then she looked at him. She said, "Why didn't you tell me about this in March?" "Because she instructed me not to." "Why?" Pruitt did not answer immediately. He picked up his pencil. He set it back down. He said, "Because she wanted you to find the cave first. She wanted you to find the letters. She wanted you to find the seeds. She wanted you to make a decision before anybody handed you the deed." He looked at her. "She wanted to know that you had chosen it before she gave you the proof that it was always yours." Maisie put her hand on the envelope. The paper crinkled under her palm. She thought of the woman she had never met, sitting at her kitchen table on a Tuesday in August of 1933, walking into Whitesville with $22 folded into her coat pocket, sitting in the same chair, drawing up a paper that would protect a granddaughter who was at that moment 9 years old and in a strange house in Lexington and had not yet been bleeding or running. Verena had been protecting her since she was 9 years old. She opened the envelope. She read what was inside. When she finished, she set it down. She wiped her face with the back of her hand. She said, "Mr. Pruitt." "Yes, Magnolia. How fast can you file this?" "I filed it 30 years ago, child." "How fast can you bring a copy to Theron Quill in Charleston this afternoon?" He stood up. "Then please, sir, go." The hearing was set for March 7th, 2 days before Magnolia Whitfield's 19th birthday. She did not tell anyone about the birthday. She did not think about it. The morning of the hearing, she dressed in a navy wool dress Hester had brought her. She did her hair in a single braid the way Awanita had shown her. She tied it at the bottom with a piece of red thread. She rode in Theron Quill's car down to the Boone County Courthouse. with Wendell beside her, and Orrin Pruitt in the back seat clutching the manila envelope from his safe. Behind them came Hester Bramble's truck, with Hester at the wheel. Behind that came another truck, and another, and another. By the time they reached the courthouse, there were 23 vehicles in a line behind Quill's sedan, trucks, wagons, a horse and buggy, a man on a mule, Inez Ledford, Ola Hightower, Bertie Halcombe, Dr. Penhallow, Awanita Standingwater, who had stayed an extra 10 days. For this, Mavis Bowers from Sundial, who had driven 4 hours, the Methodist ladies, the Daughters of the American Revolution chapter from Madison, a widow from Logan, a school teacher from Whitesville, the 4 women Verena had fed through the winter of '33, their daughters, their granddaughters. The courtroom held 70 people. They filled it. Then they filled the hallway. Then they filled the steps outside. Augustus Reinhardt walked in at 9:55 with 3 lawyers in dark suits and a man Maisie had never seen before. They sat at the front table. Reinhardt set his hat down. He turned to look at the room. His face moved. It did not move much, but it moved. The judge gavelled the hearing open at 10 o'clock. Reinhardt's lead attorney stood first. He spoke for 40 minutes. He produced the contract. He produced the 3 witnesses. He produced the paid handwriting expert. He spoke about the importance of contractual stability, about the necessity of agricultural progress, about the unfortunate but unavoidable truth that a young woman living alone in a hollow was not legally competent to manage assets of national scientific value. He sat down. The room was very still. The judge looked at Theron Quill. "Counselor, your response." Theron Quill stood up. He buttoned his jacket. He walked to the front of the room. He said, "Your Honor, with your permission, I would like to call Mr. Orrin Pruitt, who has practiced law in this county for 47 years. The judge said, "Granted." Orrin Pruitt walked to the witness chair. He sat down. He removed his hat. He opened the manila envelope. Theron Quill said, "Mr. Pruitt, will you please describe for the court what you have brought with you today?" Orrin Pruitt cleared his throat. He said, "Your Honor, on August 14th of 1933, a woman named Verena Whitfield came into my office. She paid me $22 to draw up papers establishing a private family trust." He paused. "The trust is called the Whitfield Family Heritage Trust. It was filed with the Boone County Courthouse on August 17th of that same year. I have a certified copy of the filing, stamped by then-clerk Wallace Brandom, whose signature is on record. The original filing remains in the courthouse vault, 2 doors down from this room." He paused. "The trust conveys ownership of the entire 14 acres of Verena Whitfield's property, including all biological material thereon, including all fungal cultures, all seed stocks, all cultivars, all cultivation records, and all derivative knowledge." He paused. "To a single beneficiary." He looked up. He said, "Her granddaughter, Magnolia Whitfield." Pause. "Born March 9th, 1924. Pause. Who was at the time of the trust's creation 9 years old?" The room did not breathe. Orrin Pruitt continued, "The trust includes a no conveyance clause. It states that no party, not the trustee, not the beneficiary, not any future representative may sell, lease, license, patent, or otherwise convey the biological materials of this property to any commercial entity." He paused. "For 99 years from the date of filing." He paused. "That clause expires in 2032. He set the papers down on the witness chair. He said, Your Honor, the contract Reinhardt presents today is dated March 8, 1939, 6 years after this trust was filed with this courthouse. Across the hall, he paused. Whether Verena Whitfield signed the Reinhardt contract or not is not relevant. He paused. She did not have the legal authority to sign it by 1939. The seeds were not hers. He looked at the judge. He said, They were already magnolias. The room exhaled all at once, a sound like wind. Reinhardt's lead attorney stood up so fast his chair fell over. He spoke for 10 minutes. He spoke about reasonable interpretation. He spoke about evidentiary standards. He spoke about the unfortunate possibility of a private trust filed in a small rural county by a woman of dubious mental state at an advanced age. He spoke about whether the original filing might have been tampered with. He spoke about whether Mr. Pruitt, a man also of advanced age, could be reliably trusted to remember accurately what had happened in his office a decade ago. The judge frowned. He held up a hand. He said, Mr. Pruitt, can you produce beyond your own testimony any corroborating witness to Mrs. Whitfield's intent in creating this trust? Orrin Pruitt paused. He said, Your Honor, Mrs. Whitfield came to my office alone in 1933. The judge nodded. He looked at the lead attorney. He looked at Theron Quill. He said, I will need to take a recess to review the original courthouse filings before I can rule. He raised the gavel, and the courtroom door at the back of the room opened. Sister Marguerite walked in. She was holding a small leather suitcase, snow on her shoulders, a wool coat over her habit, a face Maisie had not seen in 11 months. She walked down the center aisle, slow, steady, like a woman who had been planning this walk for 9 years and had decided this morning was the morning. She stopped at the witness table. She set the suitcase on the floor. She looked at the judge. She said, Your Honor, my name is Sister Marguerite Donovan. I am a novice at the Sisters of Mercy Home for Girls in Charleston, West Virginia. I am here to offer testimony, if the court will allow it. The judge lowered the gavel. He said, Sister, please be sworn in. Sister Marguerite was sworn in. She sat down. She opened the suitcase. Inside it, folded carefully, tied with twine, were 47 envelopes. She lifted them out. She set them on the witness ledge. Theron Quill walked over slowly, as if afraid the envelopes would dissolve if he moved too fast. He said, Sister, what are these? Sister Marguerite said, These are 47 letters written by Mrs. Verena Whitfield to her granddaughter Magnolia Whitfield between November of 1934 and December of 1942. They were addressed to the Sisters of Mercy Home for Girls, care of Magnolia Whitfield. They were intercepted upon arrival by Sister Vesta Albright, the director of the home. She paused. They were never delivered to Magnolia. A murmur ran through the room. Sister Marguerite said, I removed them from Sister Vesta's locked desk one at a time. Beginning in 1935, when I joined the order, I replaced each one with a blank envelope of similar weight, so she would not notice. I kept them in a Bible in my own quarters for 8 years. She paused. I had hoped one day to give them to Magnolia myself. When she came of age, Maisie was crying. She was not making a sound. The tears were just running down her face. Sister Marguerite reached into the bottom of the suitcase. She lifted out a second folder. She said, Your Honor, I have additional materials. Sister Vesta Albright also kept a personal ledger of correspondence she received from outside donors to the home. I copied the relevant pages in November of last year, after Mr. Pruitt's investigator wrote to me requesting any information I might have. She handed the folder to the bailiff. The bailiff carried it to the judge. Sister Marguerite said, "The ledger shows that between November of 1934 and October of 1942, Sister Vesta received 43 payments from Reinhardt Botanical Holdings of $100 each. The notations next to each payment say, 'Reward, M.W. Silence Maintained.'" The room exploded. Reinhardt's lead attorney shouted something Maisie did not hear. Reinhardt himself sat very still at the front table, with his hat in his hands, and his face as gray as the marble floor. The judge banged the gavel 3 times, hard. He said, "Order, order in this court." The room went quiet. The judge read the ledger pages, slowly, for a full 10 minutes. He set them down. He looked at Sister Marguerite. He said, "Sister, I have one question." "Yes, Your Honor." "Why did you not come forward sooner?" Sister Marguerite said, "Because I was 22 years old when I joined the order, because Sister Vesta was my superior, and I was afraid of her, because I did not know the full picture until Mr. Pruitt's investigator wrote to me last fall." She paused. She looked at Maisie. She said, "And because I gave Magnolia an apple at the gate the morning she left, and I told myself it was enough, and it was not enough." She paused. "It was never going to be enough. I am here to make it more." The judge took off his glasses. He set them on the bench. He looked at Reinhardt. He said, "Mr. Reinhardt, the contract you present today, whether real or forged, is void. Your motion is denied. The Whitfield Family Heritage Trust is hereby affirmed in its original 1933 form. Furthermore, this court is referring the documents provided by Sister Marguerite Donovan to the United States Department of Agriculture and the Department of Justice for independent investigation." He raised the gavel. He said, "Court is adjourned." The room did not move for one long second. Then a sound came up out of the gallery. It was not a cheer. It was not applause. It was a sound Maisie had never heard before. 23 women and 40-some children and 6 old men and Hester Bramble and Awanita Standingwater and Wendell Crane, all of them standing, crying, holding each other, making the sound that women make when they win something. They did not know they were allowed to win. Maisie sat in her chair. She put her face in her hands, and from the back of the courtroom, Awanita Standingwater began to sing. It was a Cherokee song. It was not loud, but the room got quiet around it, like the song knew it had been waiting 400 years for this courthouse. And the courthouse had finally been built. They drove home up the mountain in a caravan that took an hour. Maisie sat in the back of Theron Quill's sedan with her hands folded in her lap, the trust papers between her and the door, Wendell beside her on the other side. He had not said a word since Orrin Pruitt sat down. Halfway up the path, she turned to him. She said, "Wendell." "Yes." "Will you stay?" He looked at her. He said, "I will stay as long as you want me to." She said, "That might be a long time." He said, "That is the right answer." He took her hand. He held it. He did not let it go. She did not let it go either. The road kept going up. They married in the fall. Hester Bramble stood up with Maisie as her witness. Awanita Standingwater sang the song again. The Methodist minister read the vows. The Hollow women set up tables on the terraces. They laid out platters of Cherokee Trail of Tears beans and candy roaster squash and cornbread made with Hollow Ridge Red. Mavis Bowers drove 4 hours from Sundial with a chocolate cake she had baked herself. Orrin Pruitt gave Maisie away. She did not have a father, but she had a man who had been protecting her since she was 9 years old. Without ever knowing her face, she had picked him. It was right. They had 3 children, Verena, Name for the grandmother she would tell them about every night before bed, Lisbeth. Name for the mother whose stone Maisie tended with wild roses every spring of her life. And a girl named Awi, named for the cousin from Kuala who came back every summer for the rest of her own life, bringing more cousins, more granddaughters, more songs. They grew up on the terraces. They learned the names of every seed in 2 languages. They knew the cave the way other children knew their own bedroom. They heard their great-grandmother's voice on the cedar case phonograph at the foot of every bed, every Christmas Eve for as long as they lived in that cabin. Hester Bramble died in 1953 at the age of 81. Maisie buried her on the ridge above the cabin and planted Cherokee purple tomatoes on her grave because Hester had said once they were the best thing she had ever tasted, and she wanted to taste them forever. Sister Marguerite Donovan left the order in 1944. She came to Whitesville. She taught reading at the little schoolhouse at the foot of the mountain for 31 years. She never married. She came up to the cabin every Sunday for supper. Maisie's children called her Aunt Margie. Sister Vesta Albright was removed from the Sisters of Mercy home in 1944. Her ledger went to the Department of Justice. She was indicted on charges of conspiracy and obstruction. She died in 1958 in a small apartment in Wheeling, alone, of nothing in particular, the way women like that die. Augustus Reinhardt's company was investigated by the Department of Agriculture in 1946. The investigation found a pattern of forged conveyance contracts going back 12 years. Reinhardt Botanical Holdings was dissolved. Reinhardt retired to Florida. He died in 1958 of nothing in particular, the way men like that die. Maisie did not attend. Maisie did not even notice. By 1960, the Whitfield Family Heritage Trust held 4,000 varieties. It was registered with the United States Department of Agriculture as one of the most significant private seed preservation efforts in the eastern United States. Universities sent researchers. Indigenous communities sent envoys. Farmers from 40 states wrote letters asking for seeds. Maisie answered every letter. She wrote them in her own hand. She always signed them, Salali Whitfield Crane. Wendell Crane died in 1979, gently, in autumn, the way good men die when they have lived honest lives, sitting on the porch with soup on the stove and the sound of the creek below. Maisie buried him next to Hester. She kept working. She walked into the cave every morning. She checked the mushrooms. She checked the seeds. She talked to the mycelium the way her grandmother must have talked to it for 30 years before her. She died in the spring of 1986 at the age of 62. They found her in the cathedral chamber, sitting against the limestone wall, a jar of Cherokee Trail of Tears beans in her lap, the very first jar she had ever opened. Her daughter Lisbeth said she looked peaceful. Her son said she looked like she was home. The glowing mushrooms above her made the whole chamber soft, like a sky at the end of a quiet day. Above the cave entrance cut into the limestone, the original line remained. V. Whitfield, 1913. The children added a second. Slowly, with a chisel passed from one hand to another, across 4 cousins and 1 summer. M. Whitfield Crane Salali, 1924-1986, she came home. The 47 letters live now in a glass case at the back of the cabin. The unfinished sentence sits at the center. The phonograph cylinder sits beside it, with a small brass card next to it that says, "Play me, if you have come this far. Play me." People come up the mountain still. School children, Cherokee elders, botanists, widows, orphan girls. They sit in the cabin, they wind the crank, they listen to Verena, and then they walk out the back, into the cave, into the Cathedral of Light, into the kingdom under the mountain, where 1,847 jars have become 4,000 and counting, where the heat pipes still tick, where the orchard still leans toward its own quiet light, where a stone altar from 1764 still holds its small clay bowl, and the mycelium still threads through the limestone, holding everything together in a way the world above does not yet have a word for. And every once in a while, when a young woman stands at the cabin door with her hands at her sides and her shoes not fitting, and the look of a girl who has been told she is nothing for a very long time, the mountain takes a breath, the mushrooms brighten by a shade, and somewhere in the dark, a voice that was recorded one October afternoon in 1942 by a woman whose hands were no longer hers, says the only words it ever needed to say: "I am here. You are loved. When you come, I am here."